June of 217, BCE dawned over the rolling hills and misty lakes of central Italy with an uneasy quiet. Rome, confident in her legions but shaken by recent defeats, had begun to marshal her forces to meet the Carthaginian threat. News of Hannibal Barca's audacious victories, the Trebia, the crossing of the Apennines, the sacking of Roman villages, had spread like wildfire, unsettling citizens and soldiers alike. Italy seemed poised on a knife's edge. A Roman army of roughly 25,000 men, led by Consul Gaius Flaminius, marched in column along the narrow shores of Lake Trasimene. Flaminius, known for his impetuous courage, believed he was pursuing a retreating enemy. Yet every step brought his forces closer to the jaws of disaster. He had no inkling that Hannibal, the master strategist, had been orchestrating a trap for weeks, manipulating the terrain, the weather, and even the Romans' own assumptions. Hannibal's army, numbering between 40,000 and 50,000, had been shadowing Roman movements across Italy. His ranks were a deadly mosaic: elite Libyan and Carthaginian infantry, Iberian and Spanish troops, Gaulish allies eager for vengeance against Rome, and the lightning-fast Numidian cavalry whose raids would become the stuff of legend. Every unit was positioned with a precision that would make modern tacticians envious. The Carthaginian general had selected the perfect stage for his ambush. Lake Trasimene's narrow valley, hemmed in by hills and dense woodland, offered no room for the Romans to manoeuvre. Hannibal had hidden his infantry along the lower slopes, concealed his light troops in the woods, and placed cavalry to cut off any retreat. Campfires were lit on distant ridges to suggest a phantom enemy, further luring Flaminius into complacency. As the Roman column pressed forward under a thin veil of morning fog, the stage was set. Flaminius, leading from the front with his veteran legionnaires, marched into the valley confident that the Carthaginians were in retreat. Behind him, the tail of his army followed in blind obedience to Rome's will. Neither the consul nor his men suspected the carnage awaiting them. By the time the sun broke through the mist, the trap would be sprung, the calm would end, and Italy's fate would hang in the balance. Lake Trasimene, serene and silent in appearance, was about to become a cauldron of chaos and death, a moment that would echo through Roman history as the epitome of tactical genius and human disaster. Hannibal Barca did not simply command armies, he commanded minds. Victory for him was never just about steel and numbers, it was about fear, perception, and control. Every movement of his troops was designed to mislead, every campfire a whisper of a phantom force, every march a psychological nudge toward his ultimate goal. Weeks before Lake Trasimene, Hannibal had carefully studied the Romans, their pride, their impulsiveness, the rigid structures that defined their legions. He knew Flaminius was brave, but reckless. He understood that Roman obedience to tradition could be weaponized. The consul would march his men into a trap if guided just right, and Hannibal would be the unseen hand leading them. To prepare, the Carthaginian general divided his forces with surgical precision. Heavy Libyan infantry were positioned to block and absorb the Roman advance. Hidden Gallic and Iberian skirmishers lurked in the hills, ready to descend at a moment's notice. Numidian cavalry patrolled the flanks, their movements seemingly casual, masking deadly intent. The entire valley became a chessboard, with Roman soldiers moving blindly toward the decisive checkmate. Hannibal also understood morale. His men were not only soldiers, they were part of a vision. His Iberians, Gauls and Carthaginians, all veterans of Trebia and other clashes, trusted in his genius. Their loyalty turned every ambush into an orchestrated symphony of violence. The Romans, on the other hand, marched into the unknown, their confidence built on assumptions and flawed intelligence. Even the weather seemed to obey Hannibal. A thin morning fog crept along the valley floor, concealing the trap until it was too late. Every detail of the terrain, the hills, the woods, the narrow lakeshore, was part of his strategy. In this theatre of war, Hannibal did not just fight battles, he orchestrated experiences, bending perception until the enemy's choices were illusions. By the time the Roman army would realize its peril, Hannibal's plan would already be in motion. Every step taken, every drumbeat of marching boots, would lead them closer to annihilation. In the calm before Trasimene, the greatest psychological battle in history had already begun. Rome's fatal impulses, impatience, pride, and the hunger for instant revenge had set the stage for disaster. Flaminius's march was more than a simple maneuver. It was the spark that would ignite Hannibal's trap, plunging the Republic into one of the bloodiest and most decisive days in its history. Across the Republic, panic spreads through Rome like wildfire. Yet, amid this turmoil, one man charges headlong into danger. Gaius Flaminius, the consul elected by the people, a leader beloved for his boldness but cursed by impulsive ambition. Flaminius had been tasked with stopping Hannibal after the Carthaginian generals' victories at the Trebia River and in Cisalpine Gaul. The Roman Senate expected caution, advised the build-up of reinforcements, and whispered the old lessons of strategy. But Flaminius, fueled by the roar of the Roman populace and the sting of shame at Hannibal's audacity, marched without hesitation. He craved glory, and the Republic demanded swift vengeance. His army, a column of 25,000 legionnaires, moved along the shores of Lake Trasimene. Veteran soldiers from previous battles led the front, hardened yet wary, their armour glinting faintly in the early morning mist. They carried memories of the Trebia, where Hannibal's tactics had already shredded Roman pride. Behind them, fresh recruits and allied forces followed, untested in the crucible of Carthaginian warfare. Flaminius trusted in speed over caution. Scouts reported no immediate enemy presence. The lake seemed calm, the hills silent, but Hannibal's genius lay in invisibility. The Carthaginian general had studied Roman habits, anticipating their eagerness to fight and their impatience with slow marches. Flaminius's column marched confidently, blind to the trap waiting in the folds of the hills, unaware that each step drew them closer to annihilation. Even as he pressed forward, Flaminius ignored the growing fog rising off the lake, the natural shroud that would soon obscure his vision and turn his disciplined army into helpless prey. His fatal flaw was not cruelty or cowardice, it was certainty. He believed Rome's legions, trained and formidable, could crush any opposition if led with courage. Hannibal, however, would exploit every ounce of that confidence. The morning fog crept along the hills surrounding Lake Trasimene, curling through the valleys like a silent warning the Romans could not see. Hannibal had chosen this spot with deliberate precision. The narrow path along the lake formed a natural amphitheatre, hemmed in by steep hills and dense woodland. Any army moving through it would be trapped, flanks pinned, retreat blocked, and today the Roman army would be caught in exactly that snare. Hannibal's forces waited patiently. Light cavalry and Gallic infantry blocked the valley entrance. Heavy Libyan and Carthaginian infantry lay in ambush along the lower slopes, ready to strike the head of the Roman column. Hidden in the woods and ridges, Iberian skirmishers and Numidian horsemen waited for the signal. Every unit was in position. Every soldier knew their role in what would become history's deadliest ambush. The Romans advanced along the lakeshore in column, unaware they were walking into a trap. Veteran legionnaires led the front, eager to engage an enemy they had glimpsed at Trebia, blind to the danger surrounding them. Flaminius pressed forward with confidence, driven by impatience and pride, unaware that every step carried them deeper into destruction. The first sign of danger came as a flurry of arrows and javelins from hidden heights. Legionnaires struggled to form lines on the narrow road. Then, from both sides, Hannibal's army descended. Heavy infantry struck the front, cavalry charged the flanks, mercenaries attacked the rear. Panic rippled through the Roman ranks. Escape was impossible. Flaminius tried to rally his men, but the walls of enemy infantry and cavalry closed in. Soldiers were cut down, driven into the shallow waters of the lake, or struck where they stood. Thousands drowned under the weight of armour and fear. Numidian cavalry darted through the ranks, striking with precision. Even the veterans at the front, survivors of Trebia, were overwhelmed, fighting desperately to break through the Carthaginian line. Some escaped only to be hunted down in the following days. Flaminius himself fell, his death sealing the fate of the army. By midday, the valley was littered with the dead. Estimates suggest 15,000 to 20,000 Romans perished, nearly the entire force, while Hannibal lost no more than 2,500 men. The natural amphitheatre amplified his genius, turning Roman ambition into disaster. The survivors fled, swimming across the lake or scattering into the hills, carrying with them a story of Rome's heaviest defeat. Hannibal's trap had succeeded completely. The echoes of the massacre would drive Rome into fear, caution, and eventually a new strategy to confront a general who seemed unstoppable. Legionnaires pressed forward along the narrow lakeshore, their shields glinting dimly in the pale morning light. Each step carried them closer to a fate they could not yet see. Flaminius, consumed by urgency and the desire to punish Hannibal, urged his men onward, blind to the trap waiting around every bend. Hannibal's strategy was unfolding with ruthless precision. Every unit of his army was in place, cavalry ready to strike the flanks, Gallic infantry poised to cut off retreat, heavy Libyan and Carthaginian infantry waiting to crush the front. From their concealed positions in the hills and forests, the Carthaginians watched the Romans advance, calculating, patient and deadly. As the column stretched along the lakeshore, the first shots rang out. Arrows and javelins rained from the heights above, sowing confusion and panic. Legionnaires tried to form battle lines, but the narrow road allowed no room for manoeuvre. Hannibal's cavalry surged from the flanks, cutting the column into segments. The Romans were trapped, unable to advance or retreat, forced into a killing ground designed by the Carthaginian mind. Flaminius rode among his men, shouting orders that could not reach every corner of the column. The veterans at the front fought bravely, but the relentless pressure of enemy attacks forced them back toward the lake. Soldiers slipped into the water, drowning under their own armour, while others fell to the merciless charges of Numidian horsemen. Panic spread like wildfire. Families of Roman citizens would hear of this day for generations, a horror their city had never known. The battle raged for hours. Romans were slaughtered by thousands, their formations shattered, their morale broken. Even seasoned soldiers could not withstand the precision and ferocity of Hannibal's attack. By the time the fog lifted, the valley was littered with corpses. Hannibal's forces had executed the ambush flawlessly. Only fragments of the Roman army escaped, and those carried with them a tale of utter disaster. This march, intended as a pursuit, had become Rome's most humiliating defeat. The lessons were immediate and harsh. Arrogance and impatience could be as deadly as any sword. Hannibal had turned the landscape itself into a weapon, and the Republic would feel the consequences for years to come. The first clash erupted suddenly, a roar of men and horses that shattered the morning fog. Roman legionnaires, caught off guard, tried to form their lines, but the narrow valley offered no space for discipline to take hold. Hannibal's plan had been flawless. From the hills, Gallic and Iberian infantry poured down on the flanks, while heavy Libyan infantry pinned the front. Numidian cavalry struck from behind, cutting off any chance of retreat. For 3 hours, the valley became a furnace of blood and smoke. Arrows darkened the air, javelins rained down like hail, and the clash of swords echoed against the surrounding hills. Legionnaires fought with desperate courage, but every move forward was met with a counterattack, every attempt to break free blocked by another layer of Hannibal's trap. Flaminius rode through the chaos, rallying his men with shouts, but even his presence could not steady the tide of destruction. The veterans at the front who had survived Trebia were cut down or driven into the lake. Soldiers struggled through the shallow waters, weighed down by armour, only to drown or be struck down by pursuing cavalry. Panic rippled through the ranks, eroding cohesion and hope alike. By the third hour, the Roman army was fractured and annihilated. Hannibal's troops moved with deadly precision, ensuring no escape. Casualties mounted. 15,000 to 20,000 Roman soldiers fell, either to the sword, drowning, or capture. Only a handful survived to tell the tale, and those who did were either ransomed or executed later. Carthaginian losses were minimal, fewer than 2,500, a testament to the effectiveness of the ambush. When the fighting finally ceased, the valley was strewn with bodies, armour and shattered standards. Hannibal had not just defeated an army, he had orchestrated a masterclass in tactical deception and psychological warfare. The Republic reeled, stunned by the scale of the slaughter and the brilliance of its enemy. For Rome, Lake Trasimene was more than a battlefield. It was a warning of Hannibal's genius and a grim reminder of the deadly consequences of overconfidence and haste. The clash at Lake Trasimene lasted barely 3 hours, yet the destruction was absolute. Roman soldiers, caught in their column formations, were scattered, their disciplined lines shattered under Hannibal's relentless assault. Those who had survived the initial carnage faced a second, merciless onslaught. Numidian horsemen swept down from the surrounding hills, harassing and cutting them down, driving the remnants of Rome's cavalry toward the lake's edge. The water became a tomb, horses plunged in, soldiers struggled under the weight of their armour, and the Carthaginian cavalry circled repeatedly, ensuring no escape. Even the bravest Romans found themselves trapped between the lake and the enemy, a killing ground perfected by Hannibal's strategic genius. Every manoeuvre had been anticipated, every retreat funneled into slaughter. By the end of the morning, Rome's cavalry, once a symbol of the Republic's power, lay broken. Thousands had died, others captured or held for ransom. Hannibal had not merely defeated an army, he had demonstrated the lethal art of turning geography, timing and surprise into an unstoppable weapon. The Republic would feel the consequences for years to come. Back in Rome, the smoke over Lake Trasimene had barely cleared when panic erupted through the streets. Word of Flaminius's annihilation spread like wildfire, leaving senators and citizens trembling at the scale of disaster. An entire consular army had been cut down in a single morning, the survivors few, the dead thousands. Rome's heart pounded with fear. Into the chaos stepped Fabius Maximus, later remembered as the Delayer. Calm where others panicked, methodical where Rome demanded recklessness, he saw what the Senate could not. Direct confrontation with Hannibal would only invite further slaughter. His strategy was simple yet revolutionary. Avoid the battlefield, harass the enemy, and let Hannibal's victories stretch into overreach. Legions were withdrawn from exposed positions, supply lines reinforced, and scouts sent to shadow Hannibal's movements. Patience became a weapon. Hannibal, who had thrived on Rome's haste, now faced a foe who refused to play the game on his terms. In the midst of panic, Fabius sowed hope, a slender lifeline in the aftermath of Trasimene, setting the stage for a war that would test the Republic's resilience, strategy, and will to endure against one of history's greatest generals. The echoes of Trasimene did not fade with the smoke over the lake. They rippled through the Republic, etched into Rome's memory as both warning and legend. Hannibal's ambush had shattered an army, but its true legacy went far beyond the battlefield. It was a lesson in cunning, patience, and the lethal power of understanding one's enemy, and the cost of ignoring that lesson. Generations of Roman commanders would study Trasimene, dissecting Hannibal's use of terrain, deception, and timing. Entire doctrines of ambush, counter-maneuver, and strategic restraint grew from the ashes of that morning. Even as Fabius Maximus implemented his cautious delaying strategy, every soldier, every senator, felt the shadow of Lake Trasimene pressing upon them. Hannibal had demonstrated that the right general, in the right place with the right plan, could turn the Republic's strength against itself. The massacre left Rome humbled, yet also resilient, forced to adapt, innovate, and rethink the very nature of warfare. Lake Trasimene was not merely an ambush, it was a turning point. A stark reminder that brilliance on the battlefield could reshape the fate of nations. The story would endure, not as a tale of Roman failure alone, but as history's greatest example of a trap perfectly executed, a lesson in patience and precision, and a benchmark for military genius that would echo for centuries.